I think the pace of migration is causing real damage to community cohesion and the social fabric of our country, because people are coming from countries where their culture is sometimes at odds with British values and British culture. And I think we are seeing that play out in a very worrying way on our streets, but this is only going to get worse in years to come.
What do you mean by that, Suella? You've just made that comment. I think I know what you mean, but what do you actually mean by that?
I mean that if you look at, if you take a hard, honest look at our country, we have towns and cities around the United Kingdom where multiculturalism has failed, where communities are living parallel lives, where people come here and they don't speak the language, where they come here and they don't want to take part in British life, they don't want to integrate. And in fact, they actively loathe what Britain stands for. And they are in Britain, but not of Britain.
Well, that, as I said, was Trigonometry. That interview premieres tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. I mean, she's not mincing her words there. Did you agree what Suella had to say?
My first concern with immigration is, I think, simply leaving aside the question of cultural assimilation, if you like, is simply the question of numbers. I mean, over 1 million people in the last year came to live in this country. That was netted off against something like 400,000 who left, so you get left with a net figure of about 600,000 people. I mean, there are whole questions about how people are accommodated, what the housing is that provides for them, the public services, the medical facilities, and all the other things that go with that. And I think that is a pace of numbers that is simply too high and too fast for any country of this size to assimilate.
Do your party have the political will to put a cap or restrict those numbers?
Well, I'm going to ask. I have a question next week in the House of Lords that's been timetabled for next week, asking them to comment on the ONS projection of population growth over the next 10 years.
Well, we look forward to that.
I'd like to know what their policy is.
I look forward to that.
Do they agree with the projections, or they're going to do something to stop it?
Well, the reason I ask is because Suella Braverman carried on this conversation. She had something to say specifically about the volume of immigration. Just listen to this bit too.
For my part, I've been very eager to deliver on that policy to lower net migration. And technically, it's very easy to do, actually, from a Home Office or government point of view. You don't need to pass a law. You don't need to worry about human rights or the court in Strasbourg. You don't need to get any new votes on it. You actually just have to take an administrative and executive decision to do it. And I had the hope that I would be able to do that. And unfortunately, I was met with a lot of resistance from around the cabinet table. And the Prime Minister, didn't want to engage in this subject and didn't want to deliver on it. You'd have to ask him.
Well, you see, I think that's quite damning, actually. So there you go. So, well, the leader of your party, of course, our broader Prime Minister, apparently Suella saying there's resistance right from him, right from his level to controlling immigration.
I think this is partly because there's a Treasury mindset and an Office of Budget Responsibility mindset that says the more immigration you have, the faster the country grows. That's the country as a whole might grow. Of course, there's a separate question about whether individual wealth is getting better. But the more it grows, and therefore it addresses public finance problems, and you can get on and do things, and it makes life easier for the Chancellor. This is without considering the other area that I haven't mentioned, which is the social context of immigration.
Well, we'll come back to that one. I just want to bring Juditha in. Your thoughts? Either you can pick whichever one of those ones you want, because we're going to cover both, so start with whichever you want.
I think I'm going to start with the question of immigration. There's always this rhetoric that's put out that Britain is a small island. You're going to be submerged under the numbers of immigrants. The key is about integration. The approach a government has to integrating those that come can always bolster an economy if you do it effectively. But when you have rhetoric that's coming from, and the kind of language and discourse that's being engaged in and fueled by Suella Braverman, when you constantly other communities and make them feel that way, they will react accordingly. All you have to do is look through history. How did things like the mafia begin? Italian and Irish immigrants were made to feel so other and so deprived. They did what was necessary to survive within their community and provide for just their own. So then when you get that byproduct of behavior you began, you cannot complain that it exists because you haven't provided a remedy.
So are you saying she's wrong?
I'm saying that the issue does exist 100%. Her approach to handling it is the wrong one because it's only going to spur on more problems that fracture and splinter off into creating more ills within society. So she's actually part of the problem, not the solution.
But many of my viewers would say she's actually just been direct. It's quite refreshing to hear someone call it out. They live among communities where there is no integration. People perhaps don't speak the language. They're not as one. Like she says in the interview, they live parallel lives, and they would argue that their communities are changing not for the better because of this uncontrolled immigration. And they would applaud someone being direct finally about it. Am I feeling from you that what you would rather is that she almost kind of like pussyfoots around the issue?
Not at all. Call it out because it is an issue. But the way you've been handling it thus far is what has caused it to be the kind of issue it is.
How do you call it out nicely then?
No, speak to it and say that I believe that this kind of infrastructure should be put into place that forces immigrants to integrate and assimilate to a community so you don't feel so othered. And you can't be...
How do you force someone to integrate?
Okay, for instance, there's a film that's just come out by Ken Loach called The Old Oak. Watch it. And you see the steps that go through where the Syrian immigrants come in. They're made to feel like, why are you here? Because you're coming into a deprived community that doesn't have much of their own. But over conversation and discourse, they're integrated where you help each other and you improve the society. It's all about knowing what is missing, what is needed, who can provide, and how do I provide access for those new people to fill in the gaps which aren't being filled currently. That's how you bolster the economy.
So let's talk about this social cohesion side of it then. Do you agree with what you've just been hearing, Daniel?
Well, actually, I think Judith should actually focus on, she talks about Suella Braverman's approach. Okay? Suella Braverman has just said in front of us that her approach, what she would actually do, let's not keep talking about language. Mm-hmm. What she would actually do is take the administrative decisions, which she says are easy, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, take the administrative decisions that would reduce net migration substantially. Now, the real question is, I think at the moment, talking about Suella Braverman, is do we agree that that is the right thing to do? And stop talking about the language of the whole thing. That's what people want to focus on. Now, there is a separate question of those people who have arrived, and not necessarily recently, because we know there are communities in Britain which have been long established, which actually live, have territorial areas in some of our cities, that are basically, that is where they live, and where quite frequently some older members of the community, still don't speak English, although they might have been here many years. So we know this is a problem, and we know it's not necessarily just to do with recent immigrants. There are questions you could ask about how you can integrate them and how you can stimulate that integration and encourage it. But the key question Suella raises is, should you actually take the administrative steps to reduce net migration dramatically?
And do you think she should?
I think we've got no choice about it.
This is the key question. What are those administrative steps, and why does your own party's leader disagree?
Well, I've already explained why I think the Conservative Party, I've given my view on why I think the leadership of the government hasn't adopted those steps, and I think it's to do because of a particular understanding of their financial and economic consequences and the fiscal consequences. And I think that is a poor interpretation based on bad modelling. That's my view. But the administrative steps are relatively straightforward because you stop issuing visas, you put salary requirements up so that you don't allow people below certain salaries to come in. There are various administrative steps you can adopt that don't require new laws, as she says, because the powers already exist under existing law for the government to do those things. So you can take that approach.
How I counter that again is what I said before about speaking to lived experience, because what you're talking about is a very idealistic perspective, because the kinds of immigrants you're saying where you put a cap on earning potential and so on, it wipes out a rudimentary amount of people who feel forced to migrate because they don't have the luxury of meeting those quotas and meeting those barriers. Yeah. But when you actually have them in this country, they end up, through unbelievable hurdles, they end up occupying all the jobs that indigenous populations in Britain do not want to do. And when you go to an airport, when you see the person cleaning the toilet at a hospital, somebody doing ungodly hours on a farm, they're doing it happily because with foreign exchange rates, they're probably sending it back to their families. So they're doing, and it's happened during COVID. We saw so many channels covering it where they gave jobs to young British people who said, I just don't like the hours,
Yeah,
they didn't
but
turn
sorry,
up, but they will do it. So the people you don't want to let in have the potential to contribute to the country in a way that is truly beneficial.
Labour in certain areas, but if all we do is carry on with the model, where our economic model as a country is that wherever there's a job that's doing, we import somebody on low wages to do it. And we don't actually address ourselves to the capital investment that might be needed in those areas which can be automated, and there are lots of them that can be automated. I'm not saying cleaning toilets in hospitals is one of them, but there are lots of them that can be automated, and we don't force businesses to do that investment, and we constantly turn on the taps of cheap labour. Then where do you think we're going to go? We need an economic transformation in this country. We need improved productivity. Instead of having improved productivity, all we do is say, oh, you can't get cheap labour. We'll provide you with some cheap labour.
Okay, do you have a plan that you plan to put forward to change the mentality of the society to then occupy and do all the things that those immigrants are happy to do?
They don't have to do all those things. Lots of those things can be automated and through investment. I mean, I've just done, as in the House of Lords, we've just done a report on modular construction for house building. We still build houses in the same way we did in the 18th century, 200 years ago. But there's a huge amount you can do to automate, to factoryize, if that's the right word, the production of houses. We know all of that. It's not happening because the house builders like the idea of cheap labour and they're used to the old methods. You take the cheap labour away, they'd be forced to automate.
But then doesn't automation open the door to you eradicating jobs and therefore damaging the workforce?
Yeah, of course it does. But you're just saying the jobs, we can only fill the jobs by importing people on cheap wages from abroad.
No, it's about fundamentally providing for people. Automation opens the door to eradicating opportunities for people. So automation might be the way forward and might be very functional. But my discourse is always about what is in the best interest of people. People function, coexist to create
what's
society.
in the best interest of people is that we have more productivity in the economy. Everybody agrees on that. One way of doing that is automating.